as I was thinking about what kinds of presentation to give today, it's sort of following along with the kinds of things that I've been doing in terms of the work that I've been doing with Indigenous knowledge and Aboriginal languages. My husband is Jay Youngblood Henderson. He's a Chickasaw from Oklahoma, and we have 3 children. And it is with him that I have been doing a lot of my writing. I think that his social activist theme has always been one of his tremendous strengths. I think my strength has been this theme called responsibility and harmony. And with that, he would say to me, well, you should do this. And I'd say, well, why should I do that? And he'd say, well, you should do this and this and this. And I'd go, well, I suppose I could do that. And pretty soon I'd be doing it. So I feel like all my life I've been guided by this person who has helped me, taken me by the hand and helped me to grow into myself. And so I'm very much appreciative of that kind of love and relationship that he's enabled me to write and to grow into it. And so we have been writing together, and our more recent book that we did is Protecting Indigenous Knowledge and Heritage, a Global Challenge. I also have, with a book that I wrote, Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision, it's an edited book, and he is one of the authors with 4 chapters in the book, and everyone else has 1 chapter, and I said, it isn't because I'm sleeping, he's sleeping with the editor, that he gets 4 chapters. Rather, he ended up writing this very, very long piece, and I said, there's no way that I can get people to sit there and, read half the book of you. I have to chop up your piece, and so I ended up chopping it up in 4 different parts, and in which that has been kind of a very important piece in the book. So when you look at that, I wanted just to share that with you. The work that I've been doing has been, taking on many discourses, and I wanted to share that, in Canada, we call what you call Native Americans here and American Indians in the United States. In Canada, by the Constitution of Canada, we call them Aboriginal peoples. Those are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also, have tried to give up the word Indian because of its colonial connotations, but many groups feel, as like in Saskatchewan, that Indians is part of the treaties and therefore is sacred and should not be given up. And so there are many multiple discourses, and so often I find myself switching from tribal, native, Indian, indigenous, and please, first of all, bear with me for all the different discourses that are coming at you. Indigenous peoples around the world, there's been a tremendous amount of knowledge about them. I think that in my school years I didn't learn much about Indigenous peoples, nor did I know much more than a little bit about even my own peoples, because basically I had learned from my parents. But we didn't have that in terms of books, knowledge. It wasn't anywhere, written. And you sort of, gravitate to a whole lot of stuff about yourself. And I remember one year finding a journal in, it was the journal, Jesuit journals on the Gaspesians, and I found out that was actually what Mi'kmaq people were once called, and I read and just relished this wonderful book that said all the hateful things that they could say about Mi'kmaq people, about how savage we were. But reading beyond all of that, I could see my people. I could see what they were seeing in terms of the people and the way they behaved and their humor and their love of children and all of those other things in there. And I could see myself and I could see my relatives. So Indigenous peoples around the world are really, it's an interesting, undertaking to look at Indigenous peoples and to realize that there are some 300 to 500 million Indigenous peoples around the world. And of those, that there are some 50 million of them that live in tropical forest areas. And the interesting thing about that is that in those forest areas, you know, all indigenous peoples, wherever you are, you're living within your territories, you're living in place, you're learning about place, you're cultivating the knowledge in that place, you're cultivating the flora, the fauna, the food, and so on from within those places. And so it was remarkable in my research to find out that 4% of the world represents 95% of the world's cultural diversity. You know, that there's so much huge cultural diversity, and that cultural diversity is related to the biodiversity of the world. In other words, wherever there are indigenous peoples, wherever there is indigenous peoples and their lands and their cultures and their languages, you will find them living within their own biodiversity. The whole ecology of themselves is built into those languages and into their knowledge and who they are. And that 80% of the world's indigenous peoples depend on indigenous knowledge for health and security. Without that knowledge, they would not be able to live. And there's so many people who are today losing their languages, and how important those languages are as they relate to indigenous knowledge. And because if any of those languages are lost, so go the knowledge that goes within those particular languages, the knowledge of the earth, the knowledge of cultivating food, the knowledge of the plants, the knowledge of the medicines that go with them. And so those things are all intimately tied. And as I look at issues around ethics, I'm aware that as the UNESCO, the organization, the United Nations Education and Social and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, has found is that in the last 12 years, and of course this is now probably, you know, I've said this a couple of years now, so UNESCO, so it's like 14 years. The last 14 years, the production of published works is equal to the production of the whole production throughout history. In other words, what we get in the 12 years has been what has been produced, you know, throughout time. That's an astronomical thinking about how much is being produced in terms of published works. And there's also been, you know, tremendous amount of new forms of communication that, you know, we have now, the internet, satellite, TV, and other media. And we become aware that, you know, when we look at all of that indigenous knowledge and all those peoples and all this kind of explosion of knowledge and explosion of published works, as that there are such diversity of norms and values, and they're not all shared. So as we know, indigenous peoples do not share the same values as those in the Western world, so also is this true elsewhere. And so we have all kinds of ethical norms that are not universal or shared, built around morals and religions across the country. I mean, look at the countries at war today. Human nature, human choices, different languages and different cultures and communities and countries. And we have good reason then to mistrust the environmental, you know, the way in which research has degraded the lands and have destroyed our environments and developed their economic imbalance. So there's some ethical challenges that we have, and certainly this, you know, this morning and this afternoon and even tomorrow, we have several presentations going on at this conference that are really building upon these various kinds of ideas. And that part of it is that, you know, that our discourses of the way we think and believe and the words we use are not similarly shared. And so these are social constructions, and each society constructs their own way of thinking. And in their own way of thinking, so goes the language that they use. So that's why we say, you know, our worldview is embedded in our language. So we also have different notions about what is public and what is private. And we recognize that within, you know, as one of the conclusions we drew in the book, Protecting Indigenous Knowledge, was that there was in our contemporary world of law scholarship that's built around Eurocentrism and individualism,